We are going to jump right into our very first story. And our very first story is this one.
Ooh, rumors suggest AMD might have cancelled its Navi 4142 high-end RDNA 3 GPUs. Ooh. Yesterday, a rumor surfaced regarding AMD's plans for their Radeon RX 8000 GPUs, prompting us to investigate further. While some uncertainty remains, multiple sources have echoed similar claims. Oh no, no RDNA 4?
Buy Windows 10 Professional for $15, activate instantly online with Microsoft, and keep it forever. Don't pay full price. Get the best deal from our sponsor, URCD Keys, using our link in the video description below. Full details on how this amazing deal works at the end of the video.
The rumor originated from a tweet by Kepler_L2 suggesting that AMD may not release a high-end Radeon RX 8000 GPU. However, the tweet lacked specific details about the changes. Okay, other sources indicated that this development might impact the Navi 41 and 42. Interestingly, Navi 41 GPU was first mentioned 3 years ago, but it now appears that AMD has decided to cancel further development right before the tape-out phase. Yee! All right, well.
So this is a screenshot of the original tweet. And so 43 and 44 will survive. So 41 is the high end, 42, the numbers, the way it works is that it actually works the same way.
5090, 5080, or 80,
I know what you
80,
mean.
90.
But NVIDIA does the same thing. The lowest number is the highest end card.
Oh.
And the lowest end, so like 102 is a 4090, and then 3 is 80, and 4. So they actually go up in number as they go down. It's weird.
Yep.
So 41 was supposed to be,
The 80.
The 8900 XTX or whatever, the latest, the highest end 8000. Here's what's interesting about this. I actually believe this. I'm sorry. I believe this. First of all, the source is a known source who has been accurate in the past. This is not a random person on Twitter. This is somebody who knows stuff. They have a history of this kind of stuff. Now, obviously it's not confirmed, but here's the kicker. If they're going to make this change, this is probably the time to do it. Because the 7000 series is midway through launching. It launched, the RDNA 3 launched last year. We still have the 7800 XT and the 7700 XT to get.
Yep.
But they already have to basically be done with...
Well, that's RDNA 3, right?
Right. But to get RDNA 4 out next year, to coincide with the RTX 50 series...
Yep.
New cards every 2 years, folks. I mean, it's like, wow, didn't we just get cards? Yes, we did. They're always got multiple projects in process. So the RDNA 4 or 8000 series cards are basically designed. They've gone through all the engineering. They're ready to finalize the silicon and start test production, at which point they start working on drivers. They start working on volume, making sure the chips can be produced in commercially practicable volumes. It's one thing for the engineering department to make 5 test chips. It's another thing for them to make 500,000 chips.
So are they going to just skip the high end altogether, or are they just going to skip RDNA 4?
No, RDNA 4 is totally coming. 100% it's coming.
Well, I know it's coming, but the high end...
They'll skip the high end of RDNA 4. The highest we will probably get is a 8800, maybe only an 8700 XT. We'll see. I think we might get an 8800.
We'll get high end in the 9s, or no more high end.
I think AMD might be done.
Huh.
AMD's problem is they don't sell GPUs. Let's back up to the history for a second. We're going to do past, present, and future, and this is really important. So it's easy to look at this article and go, okay, so a guy on Twitter said something, who cares? Well, first of all, what happens will happen. What AMD does will happen regardless of what we talk about. Exactly. So all we can do is sort of discuss it. But there's a reasoning behind what I want to say, and I want to take people on a little bit of a journey. Who wants to take a story trip with me? So, way back in the good old days of about 10 years ago, AMD had the Hawaii cards, the Hawaii XT cards, which were the R9, 290, and 290X,
okay,
which at the time were the equivalent of the best NVIDIA had to offer. They were super premium, high-end, $500 cards. Then they did a refresh, which was the R9, 390, and 390X, which were faster, used less power, cost less money, and doubled the VRAM. The 290X came with 4 gigs of VRAM. The 390X came with 8. Now there were, yes, a couple of very special editions of 290Xs where manufacturers just threw 8 gigs of RAM on, but that was not standard. I know, I had each of those cards. So the main thing with the 390X was they bumped up the clock speeds. It was a refresh of the design to keep the power in check, doubled the VRAM to 8, and it's worth noting that NVIDIA went to 8 gigs of VRAM with the 10 series in 2016. But AMD beat them to the punch with the 390X in 2015 with 8 gigs of VRAM. So we've had 8 gigs of VRAM on consumer level cards in the $500 price range, actually less than 500, since 2015. And then, of course, the 1070 and 1080 came out in 2016, also with 8 gigs of VRAM. And then somehow we're still getting 8 gig cards today from NVIDIA. Let's not go there. That's just dumb. So the 390X was AMD's last really high-end card for a while. They tried with Fury, and Fury often gets forgotten. Fury and Fury X were two very interesting cards that switched from using GDDR5, the traditional graphics DRAM, to high bandwidth memory, which is a high bit depth, very high data transfer rate memory that's stacked and built differently. It's expensive, but because of the design of the first cards, you could only have 4 gigs of VRAM. And so we were left with a really weird situation where the fastest card AMD sold for a while had 4 gigs of VRAM, and the second fastest card they sold had 8. That was kind of dumb. They were limited in what they could do. I understand why it happened. HBM was very new at the time, but I think that caused a lot of people to just go,
It confused people.
huh? So the Fury was a traditional card with traditional fans. It was nice. The Fury X was a liquid-cooled card because the thing ran hot as Hades. And the card was actually relatively short. It was relatively nice. It had a 120 millimeter fixed liquid cooler you could put in your case. It worked well.
Okay.
But Fury never really was successful because it was a 4 gig card at a time when the world was moving beyond 4 gig cards for premium. I mean, you're selling $500 card with 4 gigs competing with 8 gig cards. It's just silly. Then AMD came back with 2 tiers of cards. They refreshed, they won't call them a refresh, but they are absolutely a refresh. The RX 480
80 and
is basically a R9 390X that uses less power. It is, AMD can dress it up as much as they want, but that's what it is. And funny enough, when you run them performance-wise, they're almost exactly the same.
Okay.
They both have 8 gigs of RAM, although they did make a 4 gig version of the 480, mostly for OEMs and for cheap. There was not, the price difference was small.
Right.
So the RX 480 is a 390 power-reduced, price-reduced, more efficient card. That's great. The 480 was a great card. And then, for those of you curious, the 470 and the 460 below it were just cut-down versions of that. Now, we'll get to the 500 series in a second, but then they came out with the Vega cards.
Oh,
the Vega 56 and the Vega 64, which are easy to forget. Now, those had 8 gigs of VRAM. I don't care what anyone says. I have owned multiple Vega cards.
I remember testing those with you.
Would you care to explain to people why I don't like those Vega cards?
They're noisy.
That's one. Why? What else?
Expensive for what they were.
They were expensive at launch. They got cheap pretty quickly, though, because they weren't selling. They were unstable.
They were unstable.
The drivers were garbage. They crashed.
It was hard to benchmark stuff on those.
Look, clean test benches, fresh installs of Windows, multiple iterations of the cards. I think at one point I had 3 different Vega 56 cards. I had a Vega 64 air-cooled card. I had a Sapphire Nitro plus Vega 64. That is a super premium card. And then I had the liquid-cooled version, the Vega 64 LC, liquid-cooled, which was from AMD. It was thinner and smaller. Now, that was nice. It ran cooler, put out a ton of heat through its radiator. Every single one of those cards had various issues in games. None of them were stable in the way that, hey, you buy a 2070 or a 1070 and they just work. So AMD's driver mess is earned. Those kind of went away. There was also the Radeon 7, but we're going to ignore it because that was really sort of a prosumer workstation content creation card. Then they came out with Polaris in 2017, which was a refresh of the 400 series, which is a refresh of the 300 series, which is a refresh of the 200 series, which in some regards, not quite, not totally, not really, but yes, kind of, sort of, was a refresh of the 7950 HD series, the old, when they had 4 digits back a long time ago. Now, those had 2 and 3 gigs of VRAM, and they were a different process and a different chip. Performance-wise, and the clock speeds were lower, which is really what I had one of those too. In fact, I still have one. I've got, you know what, that's not important to the story. Moving forward, the RX 580 was amazing. It launched for $229. I bought one on launch day from Newegg. It launched for $229 with 8 gigs of VRAM, and it was performance competitive, faster in many regards, with the GTX 1060 6 gig card.
It just worked.
And it was reliable. They worked out all the kinks and issues. It ran cool and quiet. It didn't use much power. The 8 gigs of RAM was reliable, and AMD nailed the drivers. I have used multiple 500 series cards in multiple machines and had no problems. 2 thumbs up to whatever they did with the 500 series. It only took them 5 years and 4 refreshes of cards to get there. Now, there was no 590 until later, and the 590 was a 580 with a slight clock speed bump, and it was exactly the same card. It was the same chip, same number of shaders. There was no card to compete other than the Vegas with the GTX 1070, 1080, and 1080 Ti. The Vegas were supposed to. No. I don't accept that. They just were. And if anybody watching this says, well, I owned a Vega, it was pretty good. I'm glad.
There's several people in chat who are talking about Vegas.
I'm glad it worked for you. I have nothing against it. I want AMD to win. Anybody who thinks I want NVIDIA to be a monopoly, no, that's awful. We all get screwed if NVIDIA becomes a monopoly. I am telling you my experience from a lot of testing on multiple computers with multiple cards with fresh installs of Windows. If you made it work, great. Yeah, gag me with a spoon. Now, 500 series, spot on. Awesome. Now, once the Vega cards kind of drifted off, AMD kind of rested on that 500 series for a bit.
They did.
But then they came out 2 years later with RDNA 1.
Yes.
The 5000 series. And there was no high-end version of that. The RX 5700 XT at $400 was the top-end card.
Yep.
The top-end card from NVIDIA at the time it launched was the 2080 Ti. I'm sorry, but a 2080 Ti and a 5700 XT are not in the same category. However, 2080 Ti $1,000, 5700 XT $400.
Yep.
Well, I would freaking well hope they're not in the same performance category.
Correct.
That's fine. But AMD did not have a high-end card for the 5000 series. And unfortunately, RDNA 1 had the same problem that the Vega cards did.
Yeah.
I owned a 5500 XT. I have owned 2 different 5600 XTs. I own a single 5700 non-XT.
Yeah.
And I have owned at least 5 different 5700 XTs over the past several years. Same problem as the Vegas. They suck. Random problems. And it's different from card to card.
It is.
This card randomly shuts the machine down. This card blue screens. This card goes black. And sometimes what will happen is this card works fine on that machine, but not that one. And this card works fine on that machine, but not this one. And if you swap them, it's fine. And if you don't, they don't.
Yeah, you had to play swap the parts. It drove us nuts.
I hated those things.
And then when we got something running, it was like you didn't want to touch it.
Yes. Now, RDNA 2, 6000 series comes out. Whatever they did, they fixed the problems.
They did.
I was able to test all the 6000 series cards without any problems.
Yeah, that was our favorite generation.
6400, I did a video on. 6500 XT, I did a video on. 6600 and 6600 XT works great. To this day, the $179, which is what it is now, it wasn't at launch, the $200 RX 6800 8 gig card is a smashing deal for the vast majority of 1080p gamers. That is a great card. I highly recommend it. I have had 0 issues with it. 2 thumbs up. Now, The 6700 was a weird one-off card. I do have one. I've played with it. We didn't end up making a video on it because there aren't enough of them to matter, and the prices of the 6700 XT dropped to the point to where why bother? The 6700 XT has been bouncing around $300. On Prime Day, it was under $300. 12 gigs of VRAM, a substantial and noticeable performance improvement over the 6600. That is probably the best dollar per frame per second card on the market today. New. Now, I'm not going to use. Sometimes used cards can be the best deal, but in terms of new cards, and the 6700 just works. The 6700 XT is great. Then, unlike RDNA 1, we got high-end cards.
Yep.
We got the 6800 with 16 gigs of VRAM, 6800 XT, 6900, 6900 XT. Every one of those works fine. Every one of those works great. The 6900 XT uses a lot of power. It runs a little hot. It was $1,000 at launch, which was really dumb, but they've come down. They've been about $600 recently. That's pretty reasonable. Great. Now we have the 7000 series. Again, we have a full stack of cards, or we will very shortly. We have the 7900 XT, 7900 XTX, $1,000, although those have started to come down as well.
Yep.
Right now, the RX 7900 XT for about $750 with 20 gigs of VRAM is a smashing good deal. And it's been very dependable. I had no problems testing it whatsoever. Now, how many do you think AMD sells? So that's the past, that's the present. Let's talk about the future.
Obviously not enough.
In the past year, has AMD's market share gone up or down relative to NVIDIA?
Down.
Down by a lot. AMD is now in the single digit of the market share percentage. A couple of years ago, AMD was up to almost 20% of the market versus NVIDIA.
Didn't it only hit 30? It's like 25 maybe?
It might have. I don't have the chart in front of me. For the past...
Do you think Intel stole some of those AMD people?
No. They took a little. Intel has about 2% of the market, 2.5% of the market. NVIDIA took it.
Wow.
Despite the stupid prices, and I know many tech fans say, well, NVIDIA is just ingredia. They just take all this money. The 4070 is $600. This is ridiculous. The 4060 is $300, and it's slower than the 3060 with less VRAM in many cases. NVIDIA is NVIDIA dumb. They might be.
But they can't hear you over all the money.
Say that louder for the people in the back.
They can't hear you over all the money. It's like Scrooge counting all his money.
In 2022, NVIDIA sold more RTX 3060s than AMD sold graphics cards.
Which is why they're going that low end to try and capture some of that market back.
But I think that statement bears repeating. The 3060 was never viewed as a great deal.
No.
It was expensive for its performance.
But they sold
It was relatively slow versus the 3060 Ti. Mm-hmm. It did have 12 gigs of VRAM, which was nice, but it wasn't a screamer.
Nope.
It's not a huge performance boost over a 2060.
But they sold the snot out of them.
NVIDIA sells the crap out of the 3060. The RX 6600 and 6700 XT are a superior value every which way from Sunday versus the 3060. And their prices have fallen to the point to where if you care about your money and you want performance, you buy AMD. And it doesn't matter how many videos we make. It doesn't matter how many videos tech YouTubers make. It doesn't matter how much the tech press says this. The average person just buys NVIDIA. And NVIDIA's share of the market is now 91%.
Wow.
AMD...
And that's with Intel.
AMD is now just under 8%. And Intel has a rounding error left over.
Exactly.
Intel took from AMD, not NVIDIA.
Yep.
And NVIDIA took from AMD. Mm-hmm. AMD is not selling GPUs, which is why the RX 6600 hit 179. Nobody's buying them. So if any of you look at this and you go, come on, I mean, they're not really just going to give up on the high end. How many 7900 XTs and XTXs do you think AMD's really selling?
Not enough, or they'd keep going.
I will bet you, now we don't have official numbers.
We do not.
I would bet you they are selling so poorly that despite having done Navi 41 and 42 in terms of engineering, they're looking at the market and
They're just
saying,
going, why bother? We could put this money over here and do something even more with it.
let's do volume at the mid-range. Let's make the best $300 card we can. Because all of the 5 nanometer wafers that will be used on, is it 5 or 3? You know, I cannot remember if they're going to 3 on that. You know, I should know that, but
What was your question?
I think it's going to 3 nanometer. Whatever it is, because RDNA 3 is 5 nanometer from TSMC. Is it 4? They might be doing a tween. Regardless, they're going below 5 nanometers, but those wafers are really expensive. They cost like $20-something thousand a piece for the sub 5 nanometer wafers.
Yep.
They can make far fewer Navi 41 and 42 chips for the big fancy $1,000
And
cards.
they can on the 43 and 44.
They can make 3 times as many 8700 XTs with the same $20,000 wafer. And if those cards will actually sell,
Well, they have to make him competitive.
they've got to make something that sells.
Yeah, they do.
And so AMD recently announced their revenue numbers, and they missed hard. The client side, the PC side,
On the consumer side.
on the consumer side, they missed badly by like double-digit percentages in both total revenue and profit. People aren't building and buying PCs. Everybody built and bought during the pandemic,
and
everybody's taking a break, and the volume isn't there. So I don't blame AMD for saying, why release a $1,000 card that we will sell a few thousand of?
versus the mid-range that we'll sell a lot of.
Looking for a Windows 10 or 11 product key, but you don't want to spend $100 to $200 for it? Our sponsor, URCD Keys, provides discounted Windows keys at amazing prices. $15 for Windows 10 Professional, $21 for Windows 11 Professional, and just $60 for Microsoft Office 2021 Professional Plus. These product keys are the real deal. They activate directly with Microsoft Online, link to your Microsoft account, and they work forever. For Windows, you simply go to Settings, Update and Security, Activation, click Change Product Key, paste the key provided by URCD Keys, and in seconds, you're activated with Microsoft. For Office, go to setup.office.com, sign in with your Microsoft account, paste the product key provided by URCD Keys, and then download Office 2021 Pro Plus directly from Microsoft. Remember to use the discount code TD20 to save 25% off the already deeply discounted prices and support our channel at the same time. We have been using product keys from URCD Keys for almost 5 years now without any issues and encourage you to do so as well.